Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know those topics that just kind of make you go, huh? Well, today we're going deep into the world of psychopathy, and we're taking a neuroscientist perspective with us.
Uh-huh.
You guys sent an excerpt from James Fallon's book, The Psychopath Inside, and let me tell you, this one's got my brain doing backflips. Fallon's in there studying the brains of killers, trying to untangle it all, and then bam, he finds these crazy similarities between those brain scans and his...
We'll talk about a plot twist, right?
Yeah.
It's like he accidentally wrote himself into a psychological thriller.
Right, it's like, whoa, hold up a second, am I the bad guy here? But since we're only working with excerpts from the book, I gotta ask, what are the main tools these experts even use to figure out if someone might be a psychopath?
Okay, so first of all, ditch those cheesy horror movie stereotypes. It's way more complicated than just like a creepy stare. One of the big ones is brain imaging, things like PT and fMRI scans. It's like getting a backstage pass to see which parts of the brain are lighting up and, more importantly, which ones are going dark. They also look at genetics, like specific genes that have been linked to aggression, for example. There's the MAOA gene, sometimes it's called the warrior gene, and guess what Fallon found out? He's got that one.
Wait a minute, back up. The guy who studies the brains of psychopaths has the so-called warrior gene. That's seriously creepy. But okay, besides brains and genes, what else are these experts looking at?
Behavior, good old-fashioned behavior. They use things like the Hare psychopathy checklist, which looks for patterns like superficial charm, lack of empathy, impulsivity, those red flags that make you go, something's not quite right.
So we're not talking about your typical Freddy Krueger type here.
Yeah.
I always pictured psychopaths as those over-the-top, unhinged characters you see in movies.
Not necessarily. Think more like Tommy DeVito from Goodfellas at first glance. He might not scream psychopath, but when you really look at the charm, the manipulation, the complete lack of remorse, it paints a much more realistic picture, even though it's still fictionalized.
Okay, now that's chilling. It really makes you wonder what comes to mind when you hear the word psychopath. What got you so interested in this topic?
There's just something so unsettling yet intriguing about it, right? It makes you question everything you thought you knew about good and evil, what drives someone to commit horrible acts. And maybe even more unsettling, could there be a little bit of that darkness in all of us?
All right, now you're just messing with me. But seriously, how does a neuroscientist like Fallon end up studying the brains of killers only to find himself staring at a scan that looks eerily familiar?
So Fallon was deep in the trenches of Alzheimer's research, studying the brains of patients and their families, trying to piece together those genetic puzzle pieces. And it just so happened that he was also collecting brain scans from murderers for a separate study on aggression.
Hold on. So he's got two sets of brain scans, one from families, one from, murderers.
And here's where things get really wild. Fallon's going through these anonymized scans, trying to spot any patterns that jump out, and then bam, he sees it. This one scan from the murderer group, it shows almost no activity in certain areas, especially the orbital cortex and the amygdala.
And those are important because...
They're crucial. Think of the orbital cortex as our impulse control center. It's like the voice of reason that keeps us in check. Then there's the amygdala, that's our emotional hub, particularly when it comes to fear and empathy. In a lot of psychopaths, these areas are eerily quiet. It's like they're not even online, which could explain why they don't feel fear or guilt the same way we do.
Wow. So Fallon, Mr. Brain Expert himself, is looking at this bone-chilling pattern in a murderer's brain, and then what happens?
He makes a discovery that'll send chills down your spine. That scan with the pattern he recognizes all too well, it belongs to his family.
You gotta be kidding me. Talk about a plot twist. So what did he do?
Well, he didn't exactly freak out and run for the hills. Remember, Fallon's a scientist, so his first instinct is to analyze, to understand, to break it all down, and to get a handle on the brain's insane complexity. He uses this brilliant analogy, the Rubik's Cube.
Okay, I love that most of us aren't neuroscientists.
Yeah.
So comparing the brain to a Rubik's Cube is genius.
Right. So picture this. The brain is divided into this 3 by 3 by 3 grid, just like a Rubik's Cube. Each little cube is a different brain region, and they're all working together in this crazy, intricate way. Fallon honed in on those areas that were freaking him out in the murderer's brain and his own, the orbital cortex, which, fun fact, he'd studied earlier in his career, and the amygdala. These are key players in what we call the brain's emotional circuitry, and they're often dimmed way down in psychopaths.
Which would explain why they don't react to things the same way we do. So we've got the brain scan piece of the puzzle, but what about that warrior gene you mentioned before? Where did that fit into all of this?
Yes, the warrior gene. This is a variant of the MAOA gene, and it's been linked to increased aggression. And guess what Fallon discovered? He carries this variant, and this is huge to imagine, but genes aren't destiny. It's not as simple as if you have the gene, you're automatically a psychopath. Genes are more like the blueprint.
So what actually flips the switch? What causes someone with the predisposition to actually develop psychopathic traits?
That's where Fallon's three-legged stool theory comes in. He believes it takes a perfect storm of three elements. You've got the genetic predisposition, like having the warrior gene, then you need some form of brain damage, and to top it off, a traumatic early childhood. And here's the thing, if any one of those legs is missing, the chances of developing full-blown psychopathy drop significantly.
Okay, so in Fallon's case, we know he's got the genetic leg. What about the other two? Did his research turn up anything there? This is where it gets really personal, huh?
Yeah.
We're talking about digging into someone's childhood, trying to find clues. Did Fallon actually have a rough upbringing?
So while he doesn't mention any brain damage, things get interesting when he really starts unpacking his childhood.
Okay, spill the tea.
He describes his childhood as generally happy, but he admits there were times of recklessness, rule-breaking, and a lack of concern for how his actions impacted others. He even talks about making and detonating pipe bombs as a kid, and not just like as a thought experiment.
Okay, well, hold on a second. The neuroscientist making bombs as a teenager? That's a lot to unpack. It sounds like at least two legs of the stool were present in Fallon's case. This whole warrior gene thing has got me thinking about nature versus nurture. How much of who we are is predetermined, and how much is shaped by our experiences.
And that's where epigenetics comes in. Basically, our environment and experiences can switch genes on or off.
Wait, are we saying that our experiences can actually change our DNA? How is that even possible?
Think of it this way. Our genes are like the blueprint, but our environment is like the contractor deciding which parts of the blueprint get highlighted. Early childhood trauma, neglect, even chronic stress can leave a chemical mark on our genes. It's like a permanent note saying, hey, pay attention to this part, and that can change how our brains develop and function. Fallon uses this analogy of the fourth trimester to describe those early months after birth. It's a time when babies are incredibly vulnerable, and the environment can have a huge impact.
So even if someone is born with a genetic predisposition like the warrior gene, their early experiences can determine whether or not that predisposition actually turns into something more serious. You're blowing my mind here. So back to Fallon, we've established he's got the genes and his childhood had its moments, but the guy isn't a cold-blooded killer. What does he have to say about his own potential for, well, psychopathy?
He shares some pretty wild anecdotes in the book, the kind that make you wonder if you should be taking notes or booking a therapy session. For example, he skipped his uncle's funeral to go to a party.
Oh, no, he didn't.
Oh, yes, he did. And that's not even the most shocking one. He also put his friends and family in harm's way with his reckless behavior. But perhaps most telling is his reaction to a near-death experience. He was more fascinated by what was happening than actually shaken by the experience.
Okay, those are some serious red flags. Was he totally oblivious to how his actions were affecting the people around him?
That's what makes Fallon's case so fascinating. He's not your stereotypical, emotionally detached psychopath. He seems to genuinely care about his family and friends, although he admits it might not always seem that way. He describes himself as being more scientifically interested in people than emotionally connected.
So it's almost like he's observing human behavior from a distance, like an anthropologist studying a new culture.
Exactly. Fallon is all about analyzing, dissecting, understanding the why behind people's actions, including his own.
So if he's so busy analyzing everyone else, what about his own feelings? Can someone with psychopathic tendencies even have real loving relationships?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Fallon has been married to his wife Diane for over 40 years.
Over 40 years. There's gotta be a story there.
It definitely sounds complex. She describes him as different, but ultimately loving and supportive. Fallon even shares this incredibly vivid dream he had that made him confront his own capacity for empathy, or maybe more accurately, his struggle to really feel it.
Okay, a dream. Now we're getting deep. We've gone from brain scans to pipe bombs to dream analysis. Tell me everything.
So in this dream, Fallon is on a quest for the truth, and he finds himself inside this stunningly beautiful painting. As he goes deeper into the painting, the colors start to fade away layer by layer until he's just lying on this stark white canvas, completely empty and alone. He woke up deeply affected, realizing that the colors represented the people in his life, and the dream forced him to acknowledge this deep-seated fear of losing them.
Wow. That's a powerful dream. It sounds like on some level, even subconsciously, he was grappling with those bigger questions of connection and loss.
Right.
So what does all this tell us about psychopathy? Is it a black and white diagnosis, like you're either a psychopath or you're not, or is there more to it than that?
That's the heart of the matter. Fallon argues that psychopathy exists on a spectrum. Not everyone with these traits ends up being a criminal mastermind. In fact, he suggests that some psychopathic traits can be beneficial, even advantageous in certain situations, like high-stakes jobs, leadership roles, that kind of thing.
So you're saying the same traits that could make someone capable of unthinkable acts could also be what makes them a brilliant CEO or a groundbreaking surgeon.
Yeah.
That's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It really does make you think twice about those labels we put on people, right? Like good or bad. Are there ever times when a lack of empathy might actually be a good thing in certain fields?
It's a total head scratcher. We're drawn to these strong, charismatic types, but then there's that little voice in the back of your head that's like, wait a minute, what if there's something darker going on? It makes you wonder, where do we draw the line between, oh, he's just ambitious, and, oh, this guy might be a psychopath? I mean, none of us want to go around slapping labels on people, but at the same time, got to protect ourselves, right?
Absolutely, and that's what makes Fallon's work so important. It's not about making us all amateur psychologists. It's about understanding that psychopathy is on a spectrum. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Which reminds me, Fallon says that psychopaths are found in every society at a pretty consistent rate, something like 2%. That's true. And evolution is all about getting rid of those traits that don't serve us. Shouldn't psychopathy have disappeared by now? Why are these traits still kicking around?
Well, that's where Fallon's research takes this fascinating turn. He thinks psychopaths might have been crucial for survival way back in the day. Think about our ancestors back in the hunter-gatherer days. They were dealing with constant threats. So who do you think was the first one to volunteer to take down that woolly mammoth? Who do you think led the tribe into uncharted, potentially dangerous territory?
I'm guessing someone who wasn't easily scared.
Exactly. Traits like fearlessness and risk-taking could have meant the difference between life and death for our ancestors.
So in those terms, psychopathic traits might have actually given them an advantage.
Right. But here's the catch. Those same traits without a moral compass can be incredibly destructive. It's like this double-edged sword.
Mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So we've covered brain scans, genetics, childhood experiences, love, even dreams. But I gotta ask, what's the takeaway for the average person? How do we navigate a world where psychopathic traits not only exist, but are sometimes even rewarded?
That's the million-dollar question. And I think Fallon would agree. His work really emphasizes the importance of awareness. We need to understand the signs, the patterns, and protect ourselves from those who might take advantage of others for their own gain.
Knowledge is power, then. The more we understand about psychopathy, the better equipped we are to deal with it.
Exactly. But it's not just about spotting those red flags in other people. It's about cultivating empathy in ourselves and in society as a whole. That's the key to counteracting that coldness we often associate with psychopathy.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. Fascinating, unsettling, and definitely got the wheels turning in my brain. Fallon's personal story woven together with his scientific expertise is seriously mind-blowing stuff. Before we wrap things up, any final thoughts for our listeners out there?
It's so easy to put people into boxes, good, bad, the drill. But Fallon's work reminds us that it's not that simple. We're all way more complex than those labels. Understanding the nuances of psychopathy, recognizing that it's not just about evil villains, can help us navigate the world with a little more understanding and maybe even a little more compassion.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been an incredible journey into the world of psychopathy. And who better to guide us than the neuroscientist who discovered his own potential for darkness? What do you guys think? Did any of Fallon's experiences resonate with you? This deep dive has definitely given us all a lot to think about. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions and dive deep into whatever sparks your curiosity.